Hello everyone, I wanted to do a bit of a history video today, and this one's going to be about why did the crossbow replace the longbow in most European armies sort of in the 1300s. Prior to the introduction of the musket, everywhere except in the British Isles the crossbow pretty much replaced the longbow or other sort of sized bows. So we're going to have a look. Now I don't have any authentic medieval crossbows or medieval longbows, so these are going to have to do as standing examples. So you had something like this, maybe a bit bigger in size, replace the much bigger medieval, there's my nut gone, medieval sort of longbows. Now obviously the longbow was a really fearsome weapon, and I don't have an actual longbow as said. The closest I have is a stand-in, is this big recurve bow, but the draw weight of this is less than 30 pounds, which is much lower than the longbow. But height wise it's somewhere around the sort of same height. This bow is just under 6 feet, and from what I've seen there weren't really many longbows bigger than 6 feet, so this should at least give you an impression. I can't raise it properly in here because the ceiling it will bang into that, but sort of compared to me, I'm 5'8", the bow's almost the same height as me, so this bow's a few inches short of 6 foot, so it will stand in for a longbow. So what you have to understand is the longbow was a really good weapon, and a soldier trained to use the longbow was formidable. If you had formations of longbowmen, that was the best thing you could have. And formations of longbowmen in open pitch battles were better than crossbowmen. That's basically just simply a fact. If you look at any of the battles where an open ground longbowmen who are well trained went against crossbowmen, they slaughtered the crossbowmen. The issue was the amount of training and sort of physical strength needed to be a longbowman. So if you had your longbow, we think from historical records that there were British longbows that went up to about 105 pounds, maybe even more draw weight. Now, to put that into example, a crossbow, although it can often have more draw weight, you only need to lift it with two hands to get to a certain point, which I'll demonstrate. With a longbow, you'd have to fully pull back. So if I'm probably not going to be able to show you very well here because of the room, but if I pull back, you'd be having to pull a bow back that far with one hand, but sort of something about 5 times the draw weight, 4 or 5 times the draw weight of this bow, which is insane. And you'd have to be doing that over and over and not tire. With a crossbow, although they are often higher draw weights on the medieval bows, you are only having to pull that string, you know, a few inches maybe to cock the bow each time, and you could do it with two hands, you could do it as a deadlift. So I've got something here to demonstrate that, just to show you how much more strength would be required for the longbow. Now if you see this giant cannonball of a thing, this is a 40 kilogram kettlebell, so that's about 88 pounds I believe. This is getting close to the sort of draw weight on some of the high-end longbows. Now I would in no way be able to sort of do proper pulls with this with one arm. It's just insanely heavy. You know, if this was a crossbow I could get it in both my hands and just do that. It's cocked. That's how, you know, you'd actually cock a crossbow. So, to put it in comparison, I know this isn't quite a full-size crossbow, but you wouldn't have to lift this very far to get it into the cocking point. With a longbow, you'd have to be pulling this sort of weight back with simply one hand. Now, that's crazy. You might not come across on the camera, but this is a gigantic weight. It's insane. So if you think of the physical strength required, although a crossbow might have a bigger draw weight than the longbow, in fact it's not, because you're only pulling that weight a much shorter distance per each shot if you're not even using a mechanical aid. A longbowman would have to be trained to be able to pull that weight back over and over, and that's on top of, you know, how much more difficult it is to aim a bow like this, especially at longer distances, than it would to be aim a crossbow that you shoot like a rifle, where you aim along the crossbow itself and shoot. Because with this, you're pulling it back a less distance and you're aiming along it. It's much easier to aim for somebody who's not trained to, you know, handle a weapon. So, with a crossbowman, you could train a crossbowman in about a week to shoot fairly accurately, and you could get lots and lots of soldiers to do it in formations. With a longbow, you needed to spend your entire life training somebody to be able to use it well. So in terms of the cost per soldier, a longbowman required such a crazy amount more training that, you know, it's obvious why it's actually a better weapon. However, because the crossbowman, you know, is so cheap to produce in a sense, it's much more efficient. Now, what you can do with a crossbow is you can use it more in a defensive situation. So while an open ground longbow is undoubtedly the better weapon, a crossbow could be used in sort of behind barricades and shot, reloaded behind cover. The crossbowman moves out of cover to shoot, goes back behind the cover, reloads, repeat over and over behind fortified walls through murder holes of a castle. You can't do that with a longbow simply because of how big it is. You know, you can't get into a small space, confined space. Like I'm saying, I can't put it back here and this is in a corridor. You know, if you're in a little fortified room, you wouldn't be able to pull back over and over and aim through little holes, which you could easily with a crossbow simply from looking down it and shooting. So the crossbowman definitely has an advantage when it comes from shooting from a static position, you know, defended position. So what happened everywhere except Britain, the crossbow became sort of more and more the standard infantry weapon. And what happened over time, because medieval crossbows are quite inefficient power-wise compared to modern crossbows and the longbow, was that the crossbows kept increasing in power. So that power wasn't as efficient. So what I'm trying to make out is if you had a £150 medieval crossbow draw weight and you shot a modern £150 recurve crossbow, the modern £150 recurve crossbow will generate far more energy. Less of that energy you put into cocking it is wasted in the shot. With something like this, you wouldn't get much out of it. You know, it seems a relatively low draw weight from the energy gone in. So what they did was they made tougher and tougher crossbows with mechanical drawing systems, sort of things like the windlass, where you'd have a big crank on it to get the crossbow cocked, and they became more common and common. But again, in open ground, the English longbowman was still better, the English or Welsh longbowman, simply because of the length of the, if you imagine a bow to be a spring, this is a much bigger spring than this one, therefore this can, you know, send an arrow much further with a big bow. So what ended up happening, these got bigger and bigger as well, but then the musket came along, and the musket, you know, didn't require any physical strength really to shoot apart from carrying it. It was just a slow reload of a musket in comparison, but it made a lot of noise, it was scary, and it could punch through much thicker armour with a big lead ball than these could. So that's basically what happened. You went from something requiring lots and lots of physical strength and skill to something require less physical strength and skill, to something again requiring less physical strength, still an amount of skill, but you know, volley of musketeers was very scary in terms of all the like loud sounds it would have made for the horses and cavalry, whereas, you know, these were relatively silent. So hopefully that summed it up well enough. The crossbow in most of Europe except for Britain replaced the longbow simply because of, you know, the ease of training soldiers to use it and some advantages to defensive shooting, and then the musket came along and changed everything.